Let us bring in our intelligence panel, and I mean intelligent panel. Also, Michael Isikoff is the chief investigative correspondent for Yahoo News. He's up one flight of stairs, literally just one flight of stairs from where I'm sitting right now, here in our Washington bureau. And here with me on set, Frank Cilluffo and Steve Chaggaris. Frank is a CBSN security contributor and former Homeland Security advisor to President George W. Bush, and as you all well know, Steve is senior political editor for CBS News and a very big deal around here. Frank, let me start with you.
Thanks, Vader.
The laziest question in Washington always is, what do you make of this? But it seems to me, as banal as that question is, it's kind of at the essence of all this. What is the average American supposed to make of this? The president said on Saturday his successor wiretapped him during the alleging the president of the United States knowingly broke a law that is a post-Watergate firewall against this kind of politicization of the law enforcement apparatus of the United States. What do we make of that?
You know, I think the way you teed up the show, is that it's startling, and it really was startling. And if it's accurate, it's blockbuster news, but it's very thin on any evidence whatsoever in terms of what we saw play out here. So the bottom line is, if there in fact was information that was gleaned, it was probably incidental and probably based on Russian targets that were already of interest.
Information gleaned from many of these conversations.
From many of these conversations. Now, firstly, the president can't mandate a wiretapping. It requires, there are two ways you can go through it. There's a criminal warrant, a Title III warrant, or a FISA order, both of which require a judge to be able to agree to that particular case, both of which need to be presented, and both of which have to include probable cause. So the president did not himself, I would imagine.
He's denied it, and he would have no legal authority to do so.
Exactly.
And lots of people in our audience are probably hearing this acronym FISA maybe for the first time. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that's the underlying legislation. The FISA court, under that same acronym, is the court you go to. It's a secret court. It can be declassified, but it's a secret court. But the judges are empowered to review the evidence and provide wiretap authority if there's a probable cause of a crime, or there is a foreign actor involved that is of sufficient suspicion and or threat to the United States. Is that
foreign agent, absolutely.
Is that the standard?
And it's not a rubber stamp. There's it's an actual vigorous process, and one that needs to be argued, and a judge ultimately has to take the case and make a decision.
Michael, upstairs, I know you can hear me because we have the magic of microphones and all sorts of cool devices. What are the threads of reportage on this story, and where do you think they are either beginning to ravel together or still unraveled, and where does this conversation go next, or where ought it go next?
I gotta say, this story, if anything, has only gotten murkier over the last few days. Clearly, President Obama's tweets on Saturday, they seem to come, as best we can tell, from this Breitbart news article, which is based on in part on a Mark Levin radio show rant the night before, and to the extent that it could be tied to anything, is based on a story from November by a former British member of Parliament, Louise Mensch, who wrote about a FISA warrant that had been approved targeting people close to Donald Trump. Now, I should say that no American news organization, not CBS News, not Yahoo News, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, has corroborated the Louise Mensch account about the FISA warrant. But we do have these multiple stories from prominent news organizations that refer to some sort of intercepted communications between suspected Russian operatives and people who had some association with the Trump camp. We don't know what was said in any of those communications. We don't know, were they based on FISAs that targeted Russians in the United States, Trump people in the United States. None of that has been confirmed. And I should add, while James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence, made a lot of headlines yesterday when he pretty much denied what the president said, he also said something else that was pretty significant, that as of January 20, when he left office, he had not seen any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians or the Kremlin, which is a pretty significant statement, because that is sort of the foundational premise behind this entire investigation, that there may have been such collusion. So what we have right now is an exceedingly murky situation where we're not sure whether there's a there behind anything the president said or anything the congressional Democrats say they want to investigate.
Michael, before I let you go on this point, you brought up a key word, collusion, because for a long time, as you well know, the Trump campaign, transition, and presidency said there were no contacts. Even as recently as a week ago, Sean Spicer was at the podium saying, at what point do you stop investigating because there's nothing there? Well, in the intervening days, lots of contacts were established and therefore confirmed. Sessions, Carter Page, Mike Flynn, we already knew about, the former national security advisor, and others. And it seemed to me, interestingly, this weekend, not only former DNI, Director of National Intelligence Clapper, but earlier in the week, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan used this word collusion, seeming to give up the idea that they can no longer say there weren't contacts or communication, just not this active engagement that would rise to the either clinical, dictionary, or more importantly, legal definition of collusion.
Right. Now, of those, I think from what we know and what has been reported, the Flynn communications with Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, are the most problematic because from all indications they were discussing on the very day President Obama imposed sanctions over the election hack, some sort of assurances from Michael Flynn, then the National Security Advisor designate, that they would be revisited once Trump took office. So seeming to indicate the president would pull back or take another look at this. That, on its face, does seem problematic. But beyond that, what, is there a crime there? Is there, was there, a violation of some federal statute? It's not at all clear. And on the other contacts, sessions with Kislyak, I don't think anybody is suggesting there was any crime committed. Clearly, Sessions didn't tell the truth or didn't tell the full story to the Senate Judiciary Committee. Carter Page, who knows what he's saying? He said so many different things. Right. But I just think if you just take these piece by piece, we got to be really cautious about what we've got here. Contacts. Lots of people have contacts with Russians. Does it go beyond? And like I say, I think those Flynn talks with Kislyak are problematic. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, we haven't seen evidence of something that elevates this to a violation of federal criminal statutes.
Steve, we have this murkiness that both of our guests have talked about, and they are experts in this field. And yet we have what feels like, at times, a political firestorm, disproportionate to the underlying facts before us. Is it a becoming, or is it already a distraction of serious weight for this White House?
It's a huge distraction, not just for the White House, but think of congressional Republicans and the position they're being put in. They're flummoxed, baffled, scratching their heads, pick a description, trying to figure out how to react. And it's not just this series of tweets. It's what Trump has been doing pretty much throughout the campaign and through the transition. Anytime an incendiary tweet comes out, then we're running to Capitol Hill to get reaction from Republicans. And Republicans, I'm hearing from them, they're saying this is not a position we want to be in right now. We have real work that we want to get done on the Hill. We want to do Obamacare. We want to do tax reform. Yet we have to continually answer for Donald Trump. And it puts them in this position of one of two things. One, in this specific case, they're out there saying, we haven't seen any evidence to back up this claim. And that puts them in an odd position because Donald Trump looks at that as sort of a loyalty test. We saw what happened to Marco Rubio this weekend, who basically was saying, I've seen no evidence. Trump reads that as, you're not backing me up on my tweets, so therefore you're my enemy. Well, wait a minute. Marco Rubio didn't ask for any of this. He was being asked to respond to something that he knew nothing about until we woke up over the weekend and saw these tweets. And so again, these Republicans are finding themselves in a position that I think after a while, maybe it's going to cause some real friction between Capitol Hill Republicans and the White House, and that's a problem for Trump in the long run.
Frank, you worked in a White House. You understand the significance, the weight of presidential words. Does this past weekend kind of leave you in a certain way institutionally astonished?
It really is surprising. Truth be told, Twitter didn't exist when I worked in the White House, so the world has changed. But clearly, words do matter. More importantly, agencies that are tasked with awesome responsibilities can be diverted, as Steve said, from the primary missions they're there to focus on. So it is a different environment for sure. And my personal view is we really do need a congressional investigation, if nothing else, to get this off the front burner.
Do you think it should rise to the level of a special prosecutor?
That's debatable. At the very least, we need a congressional investigation, and I don't think any member of Congress is going to roll over just given the heat and the attention on this particular issue. Whether or not it needs a special prosecutor, that does raise the bar a bit. I can be persuaded either way.
And speaking again from the point of view of someone who worked in and has a professional respect and affinity for the institutions, you now have the FBI on the griddle. Not 2 weeks ago, the intelligence community writ large was on the griddle. The president put them both there and turned the heat up on both. Is there anything about this that is either alarming or strategic in the way the president is dealing with those aspects of his own government that he's trying to lead and either harness or redirect?
You know, that's a great question. I do have the utmost respect for our men and women in uniform and our intelligence community and our law enforcement communities. They really are working day in, day out, and they're there for the right reasons. If their eyes are taken off the ball, or if they feel like that their mission is being undermined or politicized in any sort of way, that really does make these hard jobs that much harder to actually pursue. So, I mean, when you really get down to it, we cannot keep our eye off the ball when we're dealing with terrorism threats, when we're dealing with nation-state threats. And oh, by the way, cyber is obviously a hot set of issues right now. And those are just three, and there's so many other. North Korea is popping off. Obviously, Syria is a challenge. These are full-time major crises that we're kind of spending our time on things that, quite honestly, aren't as important. And that's unacceptable when you're in the jobs that these men and women are.
Michael, before I let you go, you're a reporter of tremendous experience in Washington. You've broken a lot of important stories. You know how to report stories to ground. You've talked about the murkiness here and the fact that it's very difficult to wrap one's arms around what is, what isn't, what's criminal, what may just be suspicious, what may be neither. Based on your experience, what does this story feel like to you? There's an old saying that's got legs, it's going to keep going. There's a big assumption in Washington, this thing's going to go on forever and ever. Does it feel that way to you?
Yes, it does. But I also have a rule of thumb that it's never the story you think it is. It's always something else. And, you know, my gut is there's something here, but it's not quite what we think it is. Take Jeff Sessions' letter to the Judiciary Committee today, where he said he's recused himself from certain matters, Didn't say what those certain matters are, but then went on to say that if there was investigations related to the Trump transition and the administration, he would, of course, recuse himself. The way I read the letter, there is something in particular he has recused himself from, some outgrowth of all this that may go off in a tangent that we don't even see on the horizon. Something is there that he's recused himself of. So there's something there. But I got to say, you asked before about a special prosecutor. That would probably be the worst possible resolution of this, because special prosecutors are criminal prosecutors who act under grand jury secrecy. They have no obligation to report to the public. They run everything to ground, so their investigations could take years. And if they don't bring criminal charges, the public never learns what it is they've discovered and what's behind all this. And given the intense, political atmosphere about this, that would be a disaster in this case. I'll just give you one quick example. Do you remember John Durham? He's the guy who Eric Holder appointed to be his special counsel for the torture investigations when he took office. John Durham spent 3 years on that. Never brought any charges, never produced a public report. The public never learned a thing that he did because it was all covered by grand jury. That's the last possible thing we should want in this particular matter.
Special prosecutor, not a panacea, and it's not the growth, it's the outgrowth. Words of wisdom from Michael Isikoff. Steve Chaggaris, let me give you the final word on this. The politics of this, does it continue to cast a shadow, or can the White House find a way to break clear and get back on legislation?
I don't see how it doesn't go away. I mean, the Russia issue is going to be there for him, and every time he seems to try to plug a hole, another one pops out, right? He thought he was plugging the Sessions hole with this series of tweets. Now that's opened up a whole new can of worms. So I don't see where this Russian story ends.
Excellent. Steve Chaggaris, come back. We'll see you a little bit later on in the show. I'm delighted to say that. Frank Cilluffo, thanks so much for your time. Michael Isikoff, see you again. Thanks so much for joining us.